I think the thing that really helped me the most was just the conscious decision to do as much as I can to get better, right? Like take all the help, take everything that people like, because that's a lifeline. People are giving you a lifeline. So take the help, do the therapy, do the meditation, do the prayer, take the meds, do whatever you got to do to get back to a point where you can start making decisions for yourself and move your life forward. I think that is so important for anyone who goes through something like that, to just take the help, right? If someone gives you a lifeline, take it.
Welcome, everybody out there, and Merry Christmas. It's getting close. You're probably listening to this long after Christmas, but Happy New Year, I guess, if it's the new year and you're listening to it. We had a really great conversation today with Mark Raffan. Mark is a serial entrepreneur and lover of marketing and influence. He built the #1 negotiation podcast in the world, is an expert on negotiation, influence, and persuasion. He has coached executives and teams in some of the largest companies in the world. He's been referenced in Entrepreneur, Forbes, Thrive Global, Supply and Demand Chain, Executive Magazine, and has appeared on dozens of podcasts, including Make It Happen, Mondays with John Barrows, The Brutal Truth About Sales with Brian Burns, and The Insider's Guide to Finance with Corey Cleveland. And now he can add the Hope Strategy podcast with Josh and Corey. Mark loves to talk about all things procurement, negotiations, leadership, and marketing. And he's a real smart guy that knows a lot about negotiation, sales, and we had a really good conversation. I thought we got into some really good detail that'll be helpful for people.
Yeah, I appreciated that he pointed out that negotiation is not about just getting your way and having your way. It's about influencing and persuading other people. It's not about tricking anybody or holding it over them, because even if you can get somebody to do a deal that's great for you and bad for them, it's going to end up falling apart. Bad stuff's going to come out of it. And so I'm glad that he focused on this win-win type of situation where it's got to make sense for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. He practices what he preaches. Like I said, we've had the privilege to work together on some projects, and he's really good at what he does, and really easy to talk to. And he got into some really personal struggles that he faced as he was building his career and building his family. And we dove into some pretty specific detail on that. And then he talked and gave some really good advice on how to pull out of depression and anxiety and things that he put into practice in order to better himself and see some light and some hope through some dark times. So we really appreciated that as well. You're really going to enjoy this conversation with Mark. Thanks, as always, for listening to the Hope Strategy podcast.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley.
Well, we're really excited to talk to you. We appreciate you being on the podcast. Full disclosure here. So we met Mark, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago or something, 2 years.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. I can always remember where I was when I like, especially with sales specifically, like when I was in the sales process, I always remember where I was, and I remember right where I was, but I don't have any recollection of time. It could have been 10 years ago. It could have been a year ago. But we worked initially with Mark's company, Negotiations Ninja, which we'll talk about today, which, one, great name. Two, followed up with some amazing services and expertise on Mark's behalf. We worked together helping him build a website and do some content work for him. And it's been a pleasure to watch Mark as he's continued to build his business and follow him on social media and on LinkedIn and see all that he's been able to accomplish. So we'll talk a lot about that today. But as we do with everybody, we'd like to start a little bit further back and get a little background on you, Mark. Where you're from, Canada. Tell us about what it was like growing up in Canada. And for us in the States, that's like Canada's just one place.
Well, it's all igloos and
Canada.
Yeah. No, I actually didn't grow up in Canada. I grew up in South Africa, born and raised there, moved to Canada when I was 17.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I've been here ever since. So yeah, South Africa is amazing, man. Country is gorgeous. The people are super friendly. Canada is the same. Just the people are unreal, and there's a ton of opportunity. The reason that we moved was because the opportunities that are available in South Africa are significantly less than when you compare them to somewhere in like North America, right? And so my parents decided to move. It was my final year of high school, and it was the worst year of my life, moving in the final year of high school. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it, but in retrospect, it's the best decision they ever made. And yeah, eternally grateful to them for being able to do that.
I had a similar experience. We moved from Germany to Utah in 9th grade. So it was halfway, right after Christmas break in 9th grade. So going into middle school, which is, it was by far the worst year of my life. Tell me, now I want to understand, now that I know we have something like this in common, tell me about the details of like walking into school that first day.
Yeah, well, you're the new kid, right? You're the new kid. You don't speak like anyone else. You don't talk about the same things. You don't have the same hobbies. It's all different. So being the new kid in the final year of school when all of the relationships have already been developed, it's brutal. It sucks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's whatever. It's just something that kids have to go through. You know, some kids have to go through. I'm very lucky in that I've also got a really tight family, right? So my family is super tight. And so, you know, it doesn't matter how hard school gets. My parents were always there for me, and yeah, family was always there for me. So I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a family that was just really close, really tight. My parents were those crazy parents that were always like, you could do whatever you want, you do whatever you want. And I believed them naively. And it's worked out. It's worked out pretty good so far.
So what did your parents do for work?
My dad he still works. He's a millwright, so fixes machines and stuff like that. And my mom's always been sort of like office admin kind of stuff. So grew up in like a sort of lower middle class family, but never wanted for anything, man. My parents always made time for us, always made sure that we got everything that we ever needed or required to do well. And so it was just I know that everyone, like, there's a lot of people that have these like origin stories of, you know, hardship and, you know, crazy things that they had to overcome. I'm not one of those people. I had supportive family, supportive parents, and everything was just super tight. I had really, really lucky, man. Really lucky.
Did your parents have that? It's interesting.
No.
To look at the generation. Did they have
no? Well, so yes and no. I mean, they came from really good families as well. But my dad came from a family that just like his dad was an alcoholic, and just alcoholism was a big problem in his family. And he just made a decision that wasn't going to happen. And so he drinks, but he doesn't overdo it. My mom came from a crazy background. Her dad was sort of married 3 times and wasn't exactly the most stable upbringing, but still very loving. My parents, yeah, I think they sort of made this conscious decision that it was just going to be better for their kids, which it has been, and it's been great. And they really put effort in, though, right? Like they really focused on being great parents and making sure they were there and making sure that they always provided and doing what they had to do to make sure their kids were in the right spot. And it paid off, right? My brother does well. I do well. Things are great.
We talked to a guy named Eric Bandholtz a couple weeks ago on the podcast. He's the CEO of and founder of Beard Brand. They're like a Shark Tank company, an e-commerce company. And he said something to me that kind of dawned on me. I never thought about it because I grew up moving around a lot. My dad was in the military. And like I said before, you know, I had some of those kind of traumatic moves of like walking in, and I like 6 months into me living in Utah, I still have people like, do you speak English? You know, like they didn't understand that I lived on a military base. Like I didn't speak German, you know, like they just didn't, it was not part of their world. It was a small town in Utah. Nobody had ever moved in from Germany before. But he said something that kind of was interesting to me, and it's kind of cheesy, but it's very true. He said when he parents his children, it's as long as the home is stable and there's love in the home, then the outside world, like it doesn't matter how many times you move and stuff, because you kind of always have that thing to fall back on. He's like, I would much rather have had that, because he kind of had some of those moves as well. He's like, I would much rather have had that than the opposite. to where I'm in the same house my whole life and I've got my same group of friends my whole life, but I hate going home. Like going home is something that I don't look forward to, you know, and I don't have that stability in my home. So it's kind of, I was like, oh yeah. So I guess I do have a lot to be grateful for because I had, you know, that loving relationship with siblings and my dad and stuff anyways, kind of interesting.
Yeah. I've been really lucky, man. I've been super fortunate. I you know, there was stuff that happened later on in my life that was pretty crazy, but in terms of like how I grew up, it's been, just a blessing all around.
Solid foundation, sounds like.
Solid foundation, faith-based family. Just really happy. Cool. Yeah, things were always good.
You're now your dad was what did you call it? What was the title?
He is a millwright.
Millwright. Okay, so
he fixes machines basically.
Okay, and your mom, office work, secretarial work, you know, that type of stuff.
Right.
How did you know? Or let's actually take a step back. What was your first job growing up? What was the first time?
I was a server
for money.
I was a server in a restaurant. Yeah, I was 15. They let me serve tables and bus tables and work for tips, basically. So 15, 16, I was a server in a restaurant called Trump's, actually. No relation to the actual person. But at that time, he was, you know, still living large. And so I think they named the restaurant after him. This was in South Africa. And yeah, it was good, man. It was a great first experience as a job, serving tables and getting shit on by customers that thought they were more important than anyone else. It was awesome. Yeah,
I think everybody should work in hospitality or fast food
I
or
think
waiting
so
tables
too.
once in their life. It's a coming of age experience.
Totally. And I think it really it teaches you a lot about like the way that you want to treat people and what you like and what you don't like. And it just teaches you a great skill set of like how to handle conflict, you know, how to get through something. Yeah, it was good for me. I really enjoyed it. And then when we came to Canada, my first job was in landscaping. So worked in landscaping for a while through high school, last year of high school, and then into university. I had a lot of jobs. I worked all through university and tried to pay off as much of my university as humanly possible. Right out of university, started off a sales job, did well in sales, made commissions, ended up paying off all my student loans with that, and then ended up going in a totally different direction after that. But yeah, it was good.
Yeah, so at what point in that journey did you know, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur? I'm going to start my own stuff.
I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Basically, since I was like in my mid-teens, it's something that I'd always wanted to do, just because I felt like I don't know that I could have been me at any point in time. And I didn't make the decision to become an entrepreneur until like 4 years ago, and I'm 37, right? So only when I was like 33 did I make the decision to finally take the plunge. I was in corporate basically right out of university all the way until that point. And eventually it got to a point in my life where I was fighting so much of who I believed I was, and ended up in just total disaster, like really bad depression and a lot of anxiety. And I ended up like totally burning out, having to take time off work. And it was crazy. For a lot of it, I believe that it sort of stemmed from ignoring who I believed that I actually was for a long time. After that, I made a conscious decision to say, okay, I got to do this. Otherwise, I don't know what's going to end up happening. The next week, I handed in my resignation, moved to another job, which was basically going to be my launching point to start a business. And then within 6 months, I had left that job and started a business. So it worked out.
So were you always in sales in the corporate positions? Was it always a sales?
No. So I started off in sales out of university, and then I went into procurement, and I basically had a career in procurement. So started off buying like tactical buying stuff, creating POs and all that kind of stuff, and then moved into category management, which is sort of the more strategic position, and then led some teams and eventually ended up in a position where the company that I was working for made an offer to their staff to say, hey, you know, we want to cut non-customer facing roles by 50%. And here's a bunch of money if you want to take it. You can stay. We want you to stay if you want to stay. But if you want to leave, here's a bunch of money to leave. And I took the money. I was like, yes, sign me up. So I signed on the dotted line. I took a bunch of money, and that was my seed money for what was Negotiations Ninja. And then I had 6 months of runway with that seed money. So I knew that at 6 months I had to become profitable. So that was sort of my motivation. And then literally the money ran out in December. Halfway through January, I got my first check for training work that we did that was substantial enough that I was like, okay, I could actually make a go of this. And so the timing was just almost divine. Like, it was perfect timing.
I've seen that with a lot of the entrepreneurs that I've talked to, where whether it's put on them by an outside source, or, like like funding in this case, or the money, but the money is just going to run out, or it's something that they're really, some people that are just really disciplined and say, I'm giving myself 3 months in this, or I'm going to give myself 6 months. And if I don't,
there's nothing like money running out to give you the motivation to make more money, right? Like it's your money's going away. You got to figure out a way to make more money. So we did that, and it was good. I think having that kick in the ass is really good motivation.
So I want to get into this transition into the entrepreneurial stuff and specifically negotiations, but I'm going to go back a little bit. It sounds like you went through what a lot of people go through in their careers, where maybe you're stuck between a rock and a hard place a little bit. You've got the security, you've got the job, you're making money, you know that all of those things are important, you know that that's critical. Money. But then so you're making great money, but then also you're not finding joy, you're not finding fulfillment. It sounds like you're really seeking out something better. And a lot of times we think of better as more money, or we think as better as more stability or whatever, right? And sometimes you hear a lot of people that chased down those betters for a long time, only to find out that they got there and they're like, oh, dang it, this didn't do it. I thought this was the thing that was going to do it, So it sounds like you chased that for a while in this kind of corporate career, but you said that throughout that process, you noticed you were struggling with depression and anxiety and feeling.
Oh yeah, it got really bad, dude.
So as much as you want to tell us, I mean, what was that cycle like? And then what were the lessons you learned that finally helped you kind of pull out and take some next steps?
Yeah, I was, you sort of hit it bang on. I was always sort of chasing the next better thing. And I landed up in a spot where I was making amazing money and I was really good at what I did, but still wasn't where I wanted to be. And I was experiencing like that, oh man, like if this is what it's going to be for the rest of my life, like I don't want to do this. This is not what I want to do. And there was a lot going on in my life at the same time where, we had just had our first kid. He was now like 2 years old, and I was struggling being a dad as well, and struggling like figuring out what my identity was and all that kind of stuff. And it ended up being a point where I totally like spun out of control. I had a panic attack at home. Like I don't know if any of you have had a panic attack, but you basically, for me, it was like I lost complete control of everything, right? I was hyperventilating, rolling on the floor, like crying like a child, had no control over my emotions, and just, went crazy, essentially, just snapped. And my wife, thank God for my wife, she ended up calling my parents, and we went to the hospital, and it was nuts, right? And went on to some really good therapy, took a lot of meds. And that sort of was the starting point of me having the realization of, is this something that you want to do? And I think as terrible as that depression was, and it lasted for a long time, it probably lasted intensely for about 6 months, where I had like daily thoughts of ending my own life, and got to a point where I was like really close, right? I had the blade in my hand and I was going to end it. But as bad as that was, it was probably one of the most important things that's ever happened to me, because it helped me to realize what I wanted and what I didn't want. And what I realized was that if I go back to the way that things were, basically it's a recipe for disaster, right? A recipe
you'll end
me.
up right where you were.
Yeah,
right?
I'll end up exactly where I was before, and I'll take that next step, right? And I couldn't afford to make that decision. I didn't want to die. So through a bunch of therapy and all the rest of it, ended up getting a lot better, and decided that I can't do this. And once I made that decision, once the decision was clear in my head of like, this is what I have to do, and it doesn't matter what ends up happening after, right? Like I'm okay with whatever, like whether it's bankruptcy or whatever it might, I'm okay with that versus the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Once that decision was clear in my head, everything got better. And so that decision really helped catapult everything that I do today. And now when I look back at it, I'm like, I could never go back, right? I could never go back to who I was and what I was doing, because that was killing me. It was killing me inside. And making that decision really was the catalyst for everything else that happened.
No, I thank you for sharing, Juan. I think your sentiment and like, look, as bad as that was, you obviously have hindsight now, right? Like in the moment, you couldn't have fast forwarded 3, 4, 5.
No way. In the moment, it was like
I'm talking on this podcast about hope and talking to these guys. Like that's like the farthest thing away in your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's something to be said for what you have now is perspective, right? You gain perspective when you hit rock bottom, or when you go through these trials, or when things are real dark and hard. If you, and hopefully everybody can, find that hope and kind of pull themselves out of it, however that might happen. You said therapy and medication. And last week we talked to somebody, Audrey Gruss, who's donated hundreds of millions of dollars, I think at this point, to her foundation. She has a foundation called Depression Research Foundation. And so she does all this research and funds all this stuff. And we were talking about all of the different signs of anxiety and all the different signs of depression. And then how when you see those signs, or when you see somebody you love showing these signs, how to intervene and get involved, so that hopefully everybody can have the story that you have, where you kind of, again, and I'm sure I know how it is. I struggle with some of those things myself, and I know that it's never just gone. It's never like, oh, ooh, did it.
Yeah. I mean, you hang on to it for the rest of your life, right? Like I feel like and you go through waves. I mean, you know this, but it becomes significantly less of a thing. Who was it that spoke about that? Was it Theodore Roosevelt that spoke about keeping the black dog at bay? And he likened depression to sort of like the black dog that attacks you in the night. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people struggle with it, and I think it's, I mean, to a large extent, I think it's sort of normal, and it's we've stigmatized it, and we're getting a lot better, I think, at that as a society, of making it, something that people just go through, and something that we have to deal with, and there needs to be programs in place for that. I think the thing that really helped me the most was just the conscious decision to do as much as I can to get better, right? Like take all the help, take everything that people like, because that's a lifeline. People are giving you a lifeline. So take the help, do the therapy, do the meditation, do the prayer, take the meds, do whatever you got to do to get back to a point where you can start making decisions for yourself and move your life forward. That, I think that is so important for anyone who goes through something like that, to just take the help, right? If someone gives you a lifeline, take it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huch step. That's a tough step to take when you're in the depth of it, right?
Because there's pride that's involved in that too, right?
Yeah. And I'll give a shout out. We don't have sponsors on the podcast at this point, but I'll give a shout out to the Calm app, because my wife got this. I think her sister gave it to her for her birthday or something, just as it's like a meditation app, right? It has, I don't know if you've seen it.
I use it.
Okay, great. So it's got tons of different, it's like, do you want something to help you just feel motivated for the day? Are you in a bit, do you have anxiety and you need something to cool you down? We just this year, a couple months ago, had our 4th kid, and it's been crazy. There's a lot going on, with business and with 2020 and with adding a 4th child to the world through all that. And so there was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I came home from work. It was a really stressful day at work, and a lot was going on. And then I walked in, and it was loud, and the kids were loud, you know, it was just, whoa, bombarded. And I got super anxious, super quick. I think I've leveled myself out really well, but it was like, ooh, like, you know, that feeling, the chest tightens up and the heart rate elevates. And I was like, ooh, I'm feeling this right now. So I told Bridge, my wife, I'm like, I need to just take a minute. Like, I'm just going to take a minute. And I went and I pulled up that app, and the first thing that popped up on the app was like, it was literally called like SOS panic meditation or something like that. I was like, oh, that sounds like it could work. So I turned it on, I lay in bed and I do it it's just 10 minutes. And I got done and I was like, okay, let's go. Like, it was just a simple, but it just leveled me out, reset the situation. And then like a week later, this is just the joys of living the life we're living right now with 4 kids and 2 babies at home. Like a week later, my wife, I just saw the look in her eyes. I'm like, hey, go do that thing I did, you know? So she leaves, checks out for 10 minutes, comes back, and she's like, ooh, let's do this. You know, we got it. Sometimes you just got to, you know, 1, you've got to recognize it's a problem. And then 2, you've got to take some steps to fix it, whether it's a short-term fix like that or more long-term stuff. Anyways, I appreciate you sharing all that. And that's some really good wisdom there's a lot of people in that situation, right? Especially December 2020, as we've all been taking in way more information. Yeah. And we're taking in, I think I told you this on your podcast when we talked, like, we've been forced to take in more information, data, stress, anxiety, negativity in like a week this year than maybe in like a previous year total. You know, it's like just constant inundation with all of these inputs, and we're struggling with what to do with them.
Going through what you went through, did you find that there were mental exercises that were helpful, or was it more changing your heart type of thing? My wife and I have been talking a lot about this lately, about how I'm like, she communicates with her heart, I communicate with my head, and it's kind of hard for me to process feelings and emotions. Sometimes I get stuck in my head and I have to like logically work something out. So it's like, when I have a problem, if somebody comes along and says, hey, I've got a book for you to read, I'm like, I'm on it. Like, give me the book. I want to read the book. But if somebody comes along and starts talking about feelings, I'm like, I know this should be good, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, for you, were there people who reached out and helped you with feelings, or was it more of like a logical thing, working through stuff, or a combination of both? Does that make any sense?
Totally makes sense. And I think it was a combination of both for me. I mean, I'm fortunate in that, you know, we're part of a really close-knit group in our church as well. And so the pastor reached out and came by the house, and we had a lot of long talks. And then, you know, my wife was really instrumental in making sure that, you know, I had what I needed, whether it was time to be able to think or just time alone to be able to read. I read a lot of scripture during that time. I read a lot of books. I went through a lot of meditation. And for me, it was about just building the habit of doing that. Because I feel like once you have those habits in place, then you can manage that a lot better. And my habits were bad. And so I had to replace a lot of bad habits with a lot of good habits. And once that became consistent, then I could rely on that wisdom to be able to help me.
I appreciate you sharing all that. Super good words of wisdom from somebody who's been there, done that, and is now transitioned into kind of a new phase of life. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So you come out of this and you say, I've got the career, I'm making the good money, I've got the family, you know, I'm doing all the things that I thought were going to really, at work and stuff, that are going to bring me this fulfillment. I keep chasing that. It's not happening. You spiral. And then you decide, I'm going to finally pursue this entrepreneurial dream or idea that I've had for a long time. Is that right? Because you had been thinking about it, right? And that was one of the things that was stressing you out, is like you saw it, but you're like, I'm not ready to take the leap.
Right.
How hard was it when you took the leap to say?
Really easy.
Oh, so the leap was easy.
The leap was easy because I had hit the rock bottom for me, right? Because I had hit that point, the decision became easy. Before that, it was insurmountable, right? Before that, it was really hard. It was something that I don't know that I would have had the courage to be able to do. After that happened, it was like, okay, I have to.
So next question, so the leap was easy. When did it get hard? Did you have doubt? Did you ever have a moment where you started to say,
look, I mean, I don't think you start anything as an entrepreneur and not have doubt.
When did that start to creep in? Because you knew, for all of these reasons, you knew you made the right decision. You knew this was the only option.
Absolutely. But
regardless of that, 2 months in, 3 months in, you're like, oh, dang it. We're not generating any revenue yet. This is, I bit off a lot here. when did that doubt start to creep in, and what were some of those maybe practices that you had learned in order to stay the course, remain consistent and know that this was going to work out?
I mean, I didn't know that it was going to work out. I still don't know if it's going to work out. I mean, as successful as the business is, right? Like it's working out. Mm-hmm. Is it where I want it to be? No. So that's a really good question, man. I feel like there's always, at least for every entrepreneur that I speak to, there's always an inkling of doubt in their minds, this sort of mild paranoia that exists at the back of their heads, where they're always thinking about like, okay, what's the next thing? How do I keep this moving? How do I keep the gears turning? Well, I don't know that ever goes away. In terms of like doubt of like, are we going to make it? It existed right from the beginning, but the decision that I made sort of made that it didn't matter. It didn't even factor into the equation of like, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to go back to a job, right? That thought never entered into my head. There was no plan B, right? Like there is no, I cut everything. I burned the boats, right? Like there was no going back. And so for me, the decision was clear on, okay, I have to move forward on what I'm doing. And yeah, was there doubt that this thing would work out? Of course, especially if you're making no money and then the guys that are building your website say, hey, you owe us a few $1,000s. And you're like, wow.
Is that me?
I don't have any money, you guys. The next check's coming in a month. Can you hang tight for a second?
Well, hopefully you find great partners that are willing to work out excellent payment plans.
Exactly, right? And so when you're like, okay, can you hang on for 10 more days? And you're like, yeah, we could do that. Great. Fantastic. And then the check comes in and you're like, great, this is going to work out. And then those checks become more regular, right? And the cash flow starts to happen. But there were times that just where you're thinking like, I don't know how we're going to make payments this month, right? Like, I don't know how we're going to make the mortgage payment, or I don't know, if we've got enough money to go grocery shopping or whatever it is. Those existed for sure. No question. But did it make me think that I should go and get a job? Maybe this is the crazy part, is like, no, it just made me think that I got to work harder. I got to make more sales calls. I got to do more prospecting. And so it didn't make me think I got to go get a job. It just made me think I got to spend 6 more hours today making sales calls. That's what I got to do. And that's what ended up happening.
I know the feeling. So I want to get into the specifics of what Negotiations Ninja does, and I want to talk about your expertise on that, because I feel like we'll definitely do a disservice to everybody if we don't start diving into some of the details on your expertise in negotiations. But I want to say one more thing. I will say I've worked with hundreds and hundreds, maybe into the thousands at this point, but probably high hundreds of clients, of partners that we've worked with. And you're always trying to, you and I realized, I think when I did your podcast last week, I kept referring back to the 7 habits, and I was like, oh yeah, Mark knows the 7 habits. You were like spitting them right back at me, the 7 habits of highly effective people. And that's really that I've read a lot of books, but that one stuck with me. And the way that I do business is very much like, I'm looking for the win-win. I've got an abundance mentality, all of these things, right? I begin with the end in mind, and I remember when you and I first spoke, you were an amazing communicator. I remember just thinking like, oh yeah, he's getting to the point. He's not BSing me. He's letting me know kind of the state of things. And you were an open communicator, and you told me what the state of the business was in. And I said, and that made me really, I was like, I want to work with this guy. I want to help him out. He sounds like he's super smart. I know he knows what he's doing. And so we found a way to do it because the communication was very transparent and open and effective. And also the negotiation side of it. I remember kind of laughing to myself, because I'm like, I'm working out a contract with a negotiations expert. Like, this is fun. Like I was very specifically like looking at your emails, trying to learn from him. Like,
it worked though, right? Like we came to a good deal. You were happy with it. I was happy with it. We both came away with something that made sense.
I would say it's been a win-win for sure. I mean, it's, and here we are talking about it. So, but I just remember feeling like I wish everybody did business this way. So if you're listening to this and you're looking to do business with somebody and it makes sense for you to work with Mark, I will say he's an incredible person. I will endorse that, to do business with. It's just been easy. It's been and there's been openness and honesty, and also really smart. I think the way that you've gone about the business has been really smart. You knew you needed a good website.
Yeah.
So many people
that's sort of the foundation of everything that starts with that, right?
So many people we talk to would rather go get a junk, knowing it with, and we're like, you're gonna have to change that in 3 months. It's not gonna last more than this, or you knew you needed some really good content out there. You needed to build a brand, so it's like, okay, I can invest in this. This is something. Anyways, I think you've been really smart about it, and I
appreciate that. Thank you.
Built the business. So tell us what Negotiations Ninja does, which I love the name. And the website is negotiations.ninja, just to make it even that much easier. So tell us what Negotiations Ninja does and how you brought this to be.
We're a training, coaching, and content company. So training is stuff that we provide to procurement and sales teams across the world. We've worked in, North America, South America, Central America, EMEA, APAC, and we provide help to corporate sales teams and corporate procurement teams. We don't do a lot of like one-on-one training sessions. We do in some cases with executives that want to get better at that, but for the vast majority of it, it's working with corporate teams. Coaching is something that we do on an ongoing basis. So typically once we're done our training session virtually, which usually runs 3 days, then we'll get you involved in our coaching sessions, which is just ongoing coaching to not only maintain, but also ratchet up that skill set that you learned during your training. And then content is everything that we do online, from social to blog to the podcast that we have. It's all about making sure that we're evangelizing good negotiation practices, good procurement practices, good sales practices, so that people know what good actually is. Because I think there's a lot of like bad media out there about what sales and negotiation is, especially when you look at things like Wolf of Wall Street or Boiler Room and stuff like that. You see these guys smashing their hands on the table trying to get deals done. That's not negotiation. That's not sales. That's not how that actually works. Negotiation is really disciplined. It's really strategic. And for you to think that you can kind of just shoot from the hip, which I think a lot of people do, they just shoot from the hip in negotiation, you're just going to fail almost every single time if you're not prepared. So you'll just get way better results if you're more prepared. Way better.
For sure. Obviously, this is a big question, but walk me through what good negotiation looks like. Like, the process of good negotiation.
You got 12 hours? So, it starts with good planning and preparation, right? That's the foundation. Strategy is the foundation of everything.
And would you say real quick, just so the listeners that are thinking about that, they're trying to look, which lens are they looking through? Would you say this is good? This is broad across like negotiation in marriage, negotiation with a business partner, negotiation in sales and business. So so this is broad.
Everything. What I'll give you next is good. Good for everything. There's definitely some nuances in each of the areas that you need to be aware of for sure. But when it comes down to just the basics and the fundamentals, strategy is the foundation of everything, which really begins with what do I need and what do I want? Right? And there's a difference between those two things. And many people get those two things confused. So what do I need is what must I have? What are my must have items? And then what do I want is what are my nice to have items out of this? Right? We're really emotionally attached to the wants. And then, but objectively, we know we have to have the needs, right? We have to have the must haves. Good example. I know that to get from point A to point B, I need a car to get that far. I need a Toyota, right? Something that's reliable, that's going to get me there, that's not going to break down. I want a Ferrari. Those are two very different things. And sometimes we emotionally get wrapped up in all of these wants to get that, but we forget about the things that we must have. So foundationally, know what you need, know what you want. And then try and think about and ask questions of the counterparty, whoever you're negotiating with, what do they need and what do they want? And asking those questions generates, open-ended questions, for example. What are the challenges you're facing? How have you overcome those challenges? Why do you suppose you're facing those challenges? How, what, and why are open-ended, how you start open-ended questions. But it generates conversation so that you can start to understand what their needs and wants are. And once you can start to understand what their needs and wants are and understand what your needs and wants are, then what ends up happening is you can find ways to make it happen in terms of a deal.
I love that you're the expert on this because it's stuff that I do and I've written out and I've built out a lot of sales process with this, but it's been more based on experience and obviously study and stuff. But I love that you've worked out a system here and I want to keep going in it. But one of the things that you just can't replace in this process is the motivation behind all of it.
Oh yeah.
There's no, because what you're saying can be done for good and it can be done for evil. Let's call it,
Yeah. There's a difference between persuasion and influence and then manipulation, right?
Yeah, because one of the things in our sales process is that I always, and it's just because it's very organic and natural, as I'm looking for that win-win, just very, very sincerely, is that I always say, really early on, we want to understand your goals and objectives. In other words, your wants and your needs. What we're trying to understand what you're trying to get out here. And then we want to see if MWI can help you reach those. So that's the sales piece to it, is like, now I want to plug MWI into this. So I'll ask people to tell me, what are your needs and wants and how can I help you get there? Because then they will repeat back to me, this is what I need and want, and this is how you could help me. And it just kind of gets into their psyche of like, oh yeah, MWI can support me in this. They can help me in this. So we use that for good because we provide amazing services and it's important for businesses. And so it's part of our sales process, but obviously you could manipulate people as well, right? Like you said. So it's really interesting. And you can't, that's what you have to look for that when you're dealing with a negotiator or a salesperson. What's their motivation behind this? Are they just they've got 3 Ferraris already and they're just going to try to buy another one? Are they doing good with it? It's important to nail that down.
Yeah. And I think most salespeople come into the process with good intent, right? Like they believe that what they can provide and what they are providing is going to help someone. And I think with that sort of intent, then good things are going to end up happening. I mean, you are going to have your shysters out there that are going to try and take advantage of you. But I would say that's pretty rare. And maybe I'm just being naive, but I would say it's fairly rare that someone's out to take advantage of you. Not to say that you shouldn't understand and know how to spot that, and not to say that you shouldn't know how to defend against that. But I would say that the proportion of people that are out to do that are more on the rare side.
Yeah. And the people that are assumptive that there's a lot more of those people out there are the worst people to work with.
Because they think that you're trying to take advantage of them.
Not you specifically. They just approach life with a scarcity mentality. Like they're focused.
Yeah.
You have those negotiations people where you're like, hey, chill out. Like, I'm just trying to do good. Let's talk. Let's have a good. And you can feel when somebody's like coming at you, they've been burned a couple times, and I feel bad for them. But like, let's communicate open. Let's have a good conversation here. It doesn't have to be. Anyways, so know the needs, know the wants. Keep going. What the rest of negotiation? I'm going to stop cutting you off.
Yeah, understand needs and wants, and really just generate as much conversation as you can with the counterparty to try your best to understand their needs and wants. And I feel like that's probably the missing piece for a lot of people, because they try and control the negotiation. A lot of people trying to control the negotiation of like, can you do this? Check. Can you do that? Check. But what have you really learned about the counterparty when you ask those closed questions? Not a lot. You've learned, can they meet some of your needs? Great. But there may be significantly more to this conversation that you're not aware of, right? You still need to assess risk. You still need to assess opportunities that you don't know about yet. And so through those types of questions, those open-ended questions and probing questions, you get to uncover more opportunity than you would necessarily if you just asked those closing questions. So questions, and then understand needs and wants, and then try and map those needs and wants out. Because negotiation's about dealing with gray area, but you can actually map out the gray area, which is really beneficial, right? So that for this thing that you need, let's just say you need a website, for example, and you need it to do X, Y, or Z thing. There's a worst case, a target, and a best case scenario for getting the thing that you need, right? You could have full functionality of some sort of back-end login system that is really, really amazing. That's like best case scenario. And then there's graduated steps to get to that best case scenario. And then there's a worst case scenario, right? Of like, what is the least amount of functionality that I'm willing to accept? And so that range is what now you can create to be like, okay, anything below this worst case scenario, which is personal, right? It's something that is the lowest that I'm willing to accept. Anything below that, technically that's a walk away position for me, right? So I've got to know going in, at what point do I say no in this negotiation? At what point is this not going to work for me? Because that's where I either need to go back to the counterparty to be like, look, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to walk away unless we can come to an agreement on moving you up in the range. So you've got to tell me now what you can do. So that's really, really critical in a lot of negotiation, knowing where you're willing to walk away, because anything below that, now it's not profitable and it doesn't make sense and it's more work than is required. And, maybe we don't want to do that deal. It's crazy.
I've been in those positions before where you feel like you can't walk away from a deal. Like no matter how bad it gets, you feel like you still have to take. And that is the worst place to be.
It's terrible. It sucks. And when you get into that kind of a position where you've committed so much and you're so invested into the deal where you feel like you can't walk away, that emotional attachment to the deal is the worst thing that's ever happened to you in that situation, because now you feel like if you walk away from this deal, bad things are going to happen. You're not going to, right? Like, where do I go to next? And I feel like that knowing where you're going to walk away just brings up that next question of, if I walk away, where do I walk away to? And if your answer to that is, I don't have anywhere else to go, then you're in a really shit position. And now you've got to start cultivating alternatives, cultivating other opportunities so that you have somewhere else to go. Because if you haven't planned out like a plan B, which negotiation theorists call BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, it's really just a fancy way of saying what's plan B. If you don't have a plan B, then you're in a position of reduced leverage, especially if the counterparty finds out that you don't have a plan B, because then they're just going to, they have the opportunity to really run ramp shot over the negotiation.
Leverage is everything in negotiation, right?
Not necessarily, right? Because there's leverage is based on perception, right? So it's how you manage the perception of leverage that I would say is everything in the negotiation. Because if you think you have leverage, then all I have to do is throughout the discussions is convince you that you have less leverage than you actually have.
I love it, man. We really do need to have a 12-hour conversation about this.
Yeah, well, we could really get into it.
I really want to get, I really would want to. So one of the things, and this I guess is geared towards everybody, but especially entrepreneurs or people that are building businesses, is you mentioned that you need to know when you're willing to walk away. Most of the time that comes down in business to money. It comes down to a dollar amount. Obviously, there's a lot of other reasons you would walk away, right? You can set those up in your business. Who do you want to work with? Why do you want to work with them? Whatever. But one of the things that I've seen as I've worked with other entrepreneurs and myself with our businesses, that line of where you're willing to walk away is ever changing. It needs to be. It needs to be ever evolving. And I'm looking specifically at price here, because early on, you might be willing to take just about anything because you need some money to get things going, right? So
when you're a startup, you mean, like when you're starting up your business? Yeah,
you're a startup. I've had a lot of people come to me that I've worked with that are younger entrepreneurs or up and coming entrepreneurs or something that we've helped mentor, through some of the stuff we've done, but where they'll say, well, no, they'll draw their line is way off. Like, I'm not going to work with anybody less than this or anybody that does this. And I'm like, well, how are you going to feed yourself next month? Like that line needs to start somewhere, and it needs to be pretty open for most things, right? Like, or your price point, if it's a product, probably, you need to work that out. Maybe be on
you have no value in the marketplace yet, right? You don't have a brand. There's nothing that you can support.
No leverage or no credibility, no validation.
And so
of any sort.
When you're, I'm glad that you made that distinction, because when you're starting out, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to do for really cheap or potentially for free, right? Like when you're starting out your business, you're really going to have to do a lot. Like when I started Negotiations Ninja, I did a lot of free work for influencers in the industry because I knew that their testimonial was worth way more than any amount of money that I would make off of them, right? So that kind of free work was essential to me starting that business. I mean, one of the guys that I still do work for, I still do it for him for free because that testimonial basically started my business, right? That one testimonial, because he was so influential and he just made phone calls for me. Like, you got to get this guy on to train your team. And that started my business, right? So
and as soon as you can understand that principle, like that, what that means to your business is that's huge. That's I can't say how big that is it's okay to do some free work, if not just some grunt work for somebody who, because they're a bottom feeder. No, find where you can provide value for somebody that has any level of influence, and get the work done for them, whether it's for dirt cheap and way less than you want to charge down the road, or for free, because that level of influence can take your business from you being
huge.
A nobody to being on somebody's radar that has a lot more influence,
Absolutely.
Because it's not really for free. I mean, we say free, but it's not free. You're just getting paid in a different way. It's not dollars and cents. You're getting paid with something else of value. When I was writing for Forbes, I wrote 164 articles for Forbes. I never got paid a dime by Forbes for that. And people think, well, why would you write all these articles for free? I'm like,
and then you're like, dude,
the articles generated millions of dollars of revenue for our business. Like, I got paid. I just didn't get paid by Forbes.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the name brand credibility, the testimonials, all that kind of stuff still carries weight, right? That still has value. And I'm glad that you made that distinction, Josh, because I think that a lot of people that are listening to this are like, wait, are you saying that I need to work for free for a lot of different people? No, you need to work for free for the right people, right? At the right time, to get the right things. And still the method of payment needs to be agreed upon, right? Like, you're going to give me a testimonial, you're going to give me 3 to 5 referrals, you're going to make phone calls to these people to let them know, whatever it might be, right? It's not going to cost you any money, but it is going to cost you that stuff. That still needs to be a part of the negotiation.
Yeah, when I've been on podcasts, or now that we're doing the podcast and we have great people coming on, one of the questions I get asked by people that don't know much about what we do is like, oh, how much did you get paid to be on that podcast? Or, oh, how much do you have to pay these people to be on? And it's like, oh no, it's a contract of, look, we're going to help you out and you're going to help us out, and we're going to have some great conversation along the way. And it's just good, good content, good press, whatever. So
totally,
there's a lot of that going around, and it's finding that, like you said, finding the right place, right time, right person, to work with and to provide that value to. But it does come back to being able to provide value to somebody. I always tell people, if you can find one person out there that you're providing value to, just because of the way the world works, there's a lot more of those type of people that you could also provide that value to. You just got to figure out who they are. So what's the end goal in negotiation? So you go through this process, whether it's in business or personal or whatever. What needs to be the end goal of any sort of negotiation that you have? And then how do you stick to your guns, when it comes down to getting there?
I mean, that's a big question. So in terms of your end goal, if you're getting what you need and what you want out of that deal, that's great. Sort of like level one of like, now we've got something that makes sense. But it depends on whether or not this is sort of a consumer goods negotiation, or if this is a more strategic, like long-term relationship focused negotiation. Because if you're buying a car, then you really don't care if the person who's selling you the car gets what they need or want, because you're probably never going to work with them again. It's a consumer purchase, and there's hundreds of dealers, right? Thousands of dealers that will eventually get you what you need and want. But if this is a person or a business that you're doing work with that you're going to end up having a relationship with, then you want to make sure that the counterparty is also trying to get what they need and want out of the deal. But, and this is a big but, it's on them, right? It's on them to get what they need and want out of that deal. You cannot be responsible for making sure that the counterparty gets what they need and want out of that, because then you are now advocating for the rights of someone that you're doing business with when you need to be focusing on you. So it's on them to be able to say no or enough or stop. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're still respectful, right? We're still kind, we're still polite, so that even if that counterparty doesn't get everything that they wanted out of that deal, they can walk away from that deal feeling good about it. Because if you're going to develop a relationship that's built on that long term, then they're going to want to come back to you at some point in time to do business with you.
Don't burn the bridge, right?
Don't burn the bridge. I mean, you can in some cases, right? I mean, if it's a car or something like that.
Yeah, and if you're certain that either one, you're never going to work with this person again, or two, you definitely never want to work with this person again.
Yeah, then burn that bridge. Right? Sure.
Maybe there's a bridge that needs to be, but for the most part, right. If you're an employee somewhere or you're working with a partner or something, and you think, someday our paths might cross again, it's worth it to keep that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think enough could be said about professionalism and just
Yeah.
being, and like your hat says it, right? Be kind, and being polite. I think that there's a lot to that we just, and then let's be clear, being kind and being polite and being professional isn't being someone who's a doormat, right? You're not a pushover, right? You still have to know what you need and want out of that deal, and you still have to be able to say no, and you still have to be able to ask for more and advocate for your rights and for your needs and for your wants. But it doesn't mean that you can't be polite in the process, right? You can still be kind. You can still smile. Yeah,
for sure. There's a lot more that we need to talk about on this subject. So we either need to have you on again or get us on yours or just call me up and let's.
Yeah, we'll talk all about it, man. I love talking about this stuff.
One last question, and this is directly from me, and this is advice that I'm requesting from an expert. What about renegotiation? So one of the things that I've seen in the different things that I've done is it's one thing to get a relationship built and a foundation built, but over time, eventually, either this comes off super egotistical, I don't mean it that way, but you're either worth more money just by nature of the experience that you have and the expertise that you have and the whatever you have and the resources, or the industries have changed and evolved and so more money should be required, or you're just not in the same stage you were when you were willing to take that work for a lot less. And so now it's time to try to renegotiate to continue growing your business and renegotiate some of these contracts, whether it's you're buying from a wholesaler that you're saying, look, I'm buying a lot of stuff from you, I need my price to go down like this, I should have some more negotiation, or you're creating content for people that are paying you X amount and you're like, man, I'm creating content now for a lot more money, and it's hard. This by nature, this work is getting pushed down a little bit because I've got bigger clients now that are willing to pay, so I need to go back to this client and renegotiate. Do you have any advice in the last couple minutes on how, as a business owner, to approach renegotiation in a way? Because what you don't want to do is poke the beast and then whoops, now we're out of some business because we shouldn't have addressed it. That's kind of a fear-based mentality, but it's one that I think a lot of people face. How do you renegotiate in a way that's effective and keeps clients around and also keeps win-wins?
Yeah, I mean, I try to make it as objective as humanly possible, right? So when I have that conversation, if we're coming up to a contract renewal with someone, the conversation is very straightforward. It would be, look, hey, Corey, your prices will be going up in X month. If you decide that you want to still be a part of this, we would love for you to be a part of it. This is what we'll continue to do for you. We're in a position now where we can no longer afford to keep doing your work at the price that it's at. Fully appreciate and understand if this is not something that you want to continue with. That's why I'm talking with you about it now. So I'm going to give you some time to think about it. I don't want you to answer me right now. Take a couple weeks. Let's have another conversation. We'll set that up in the calendar, and then we'll progress that conversation forward. It's not a one-time discussion. And I feel like if you've got an ongoing relationship with someone, it can't be just like hey, your prices are being increased by 300%. Sign on the dotted line right here. It's a continual discussion, right? Because they're going to have to vent, right? Especially if you're increasing their prices. And you need to give them space to be able to vent. And sometimes it doesn't work out, right? I mean, sometimes people self-select to leave, and that's fine.
Well, that's another one of those lines you have to draw, is knowing when you're willing to walk away. You need to know beforehand, I may lose this client at this rate or whatever because I'm giving them an open door. And I'm hoping that this results in a stronger, more fortified partnership, but I also need to be open.
Well, and especially when you start your business, you think your target market is one thing, right? And then you build the business and you realize, okay, that's not my target market. But in the process, you've sold to those people, right? And you have those people as customers. And then you start selling into what your target market really is. And then eventually those first few customers, you realize it's just not a fit, right? Like, it doesn't make sense for us to continue to do business with these people unless they pay us significantly more money. And that's just an objective discussion that you've got to have with these people. Look, when we started this business, this is what happened. We're over here now. We want to continue doing work with you. And for us to continue doing, and notice I said and not but, right? Because but negates them as someone that we don't want to do work with. And for us to continue to do work with you, we need X. And then just let it sit. And it's important to be willing to walk away.
again, I'm asking big questions and asking you. You're giving me fantastic responses because they're not very granular questions. But if you were to give one word of advice, before we wrap up, to anybody that's on negotiation specifically, on how they can utilize the tools and process of negotiation in order to better themselves, their business, their relationships, whatever, what would the one piece of advice in negotiation be that you would give?
Can I give two?
Yes, please. All the better.
Plan and prepare. So it goes back to everything that I said earlier. That's sort of the foundation for everything. That's my first piece of advice. And then cultivate patience. As much as patience is not one of my virtues, and I've had to work really hard over my life to develop patience as a skill. But patience can yield incredible results in negotiation. If you're willing to be patient and you're willing to stay silent, you can get massive, massive windfalls in negotiation.
It's hard to stay silent. You have a trick for that? It's hard to keep your mouth shut sometimes.
It comes down to, I think it comes down to just practice as much as you can. So there's been a lot of people that have talked about practicing discomfort. And for a lot of people, especially for people who communicate for a living like we do, that's really, really difficult when it comes to silence, because silence for us is discomfort, right? And so what I've asked everyone from the first training session that I've ever done with people is, the next time you go buy groceries, ask for a discount in the checkout line when your grocery cart is full from the 16, 17-year-old kid that really doesn't care about your life or why you want a discount. And then once you've asked for that discount, politely, kindly, stay silent, right? You're just going to ask for the discount. You're not going to justify it. You're not going to tell people why. You're not going to say, hey, there was this crazy negotiation coach that I listened to that said, I got to practice this. You're just going to say, may I please have a discount? And that's it. That's all you have to say. And then stay silent and just feel that discomfort and practice staying in that discomfort, and then practice that every single time that you go and buy something.
That's a great tip. I love that. Yeah, that's the pauses and the silence in negotiation are probably, one of the most powerful. Being that ability in sales or in any form of negotiation to, like I said before, he who speaks first loses, is something a lot of people say in sales, is like, just drop it out, leave the out there and then wait.
The key is not to get the discount, right? I mean, like the goal is not to get the discount, right? Mm-hmm. The goal is to practice discomfort, which is silence. So remember that when you're going in, you're not asking for the discount to get if you get it, gravy, fantastic, awesome. But the likelihood of you getting it is very low. The goal is just to practice discomfort. Yeah. Practice silence.
Cool. Well, the website again is negotiations.ninja.
Yes,
easy one to remember. I would highly recommend, if you're in the business world, entrepreneurial world, if you're on LinkedIn, go connect with Mark on LinkedIn. He's always putting out really great content, thought-provoking stuff, educational stuff. He's chock full of it. He's also got a couple podcasts. So why don't you tell us kind of where the podcasts are and where people can find you, and anything else that would be helpful for people to connect with you and continue to learn more.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. So the two podcasts, one is Negotiations Ninja, which you can download wherever you listen to podcasts. And the other one is Content Call Out, which is a content marketing agency that I own, which also has a podcast. You can download that wherever you listen to podcasts as well. And we bring in thought leaders for both disciplines. So on the negotiation side, it's all thought leaders around sales, negotiation, procurement, crisis and hostage negotiations. And then on the marketing side, it's everyone in the marketing space, which is why we've had Corey on, which hopefully is why we'll have Josh on and all that kind of stuff. And we appreciate you guys, and we appreciate what you're doing with MWI and what you're doing with this podcast, man. A lot more people need hope. And when you can have these kinds of discussions to be able to say, look, here are some people who have gone through some stuff, right? Like who have gone through either depression or anxiety or a really bad time, but have found a way out. That gives a lot of people motivation. And what you guys are doing is really, really cool. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, we appreciate the endorsement and the kind words. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again. We will most definitely be in touch. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Mark.
You bet, guys. Thank you.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy Podcast.
I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy Podcast.